So safety really is, I guess, the gatekeeper of clinical drug development. It's absolutely paramount in the eyes of the FDA and any regulator, really. So obviously, when you have an experimental drug and you're putting it into humans, we need to make sure that, the drug is absolutely safe. So we have obviously collected a whole raft of safety studies previously to get us actually into the clinic. But where we had a pre-IND meeting with the FDA, they wanted us to do a bit more work in terms of looking at the safety profile of ARG-007. So the first study we did was an in vivo micronucleus study. We had done this work in vitro, which is essentially looking at cells in a Petri dish. The FDA asked us to do this in a mammalian rodent model. So we were not surprised that the data came out well, that the drug is not causing any impact to genetic material. But what was really great about this study is that we were able to show an even higher maximum tolerated dose of 17.5 mg per kg. So in our current phase 2 trial, the dose is only 0.3 mg per kg. So this confirms we've got a really big safety margin in terms of toxicity of the drug, which is fantastic. The second study was looking at the impact of our drug on standard of care clot dissolving drug TPA. So we had previously done some work in this. The FDA really wanted us to look at, did our drug impact the ability of that standard of care TPA drug to dissolve human clot tissue? So again, really encouraging to show that we had no impact. And the third study was looking at the impact of our drug on glutamate receptors and how long the drug actually downregulates these receptors. The reason that they asked for this is because a previous study that was undertaken by Merck on a drug called NK801 showed fantastic preclinical efficacy in rodent models. It gave them the confidence to take it into clinical trials. But what they realized in the clinical trial was that this drug was permanently down-regulating NMDA receptors, and that this caused neurotoxicity in these patients that they didn't see in the animal studies because they didn't let the animal studies run long enough. So the FDA is really, from a safety point of view, wants to know that these neuroprotective drugs do not downregulate these receptors permanently. So again, another fantastic safety tick in terms of how our drug works. So through these safety studies, we're actually starting to generate some really interesting data on the mechanism of action of our drug. And I probably think that's a whole nother video or podcast to really delve into the mechanism. But what we really understand now about our drug that is completely unique is that the drug doesn't target just a single channel on these brain cells that allow calcium to flood in. So a lot of these other drugs will only downregulate a certain type of receptor. So it might be a glutamate ion inotropic channel like NMDA, AMPA receptor, it might be an acid signaling channel receptor. So what we know is that our drug is kind of working across the breadth of these channels, but really excitingly, the drug actually gets into cells. So that is really unique as well in terms of the mechanism of action. So it can work inside the cell to protect the mitochondria and the other organelles in the cell from that calcium that gets in. So we are starting to generate some really exciting data on the mechanism. It is really unique in terms of this drug, in terms of what's already in the clinic with our competitors, but also sort of what's coming through in the preclinical development. Really, we've got pretty much the bulk of the data now that we need for our investigational new drug application. So the challenge is just compiling it all and putting it all together. So we have a fantastic US-based regulatory consulting team working on that. We've done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the drafting in that. So we're just doing all the sort of checks and balances, compiling further data, and then, as I said in the announcement, we will aim to submit that to the FDA at the end of this calendar year. So really with drug development, you don't want a drug that's going to completely disrupt standard of care. It actually makes it really difficult from a clinical uptake point of view. Also, you really want to know that your drug can work with standard of care drug and hopefully enhance that standard of care drug as well. So the ability for our drug to work with TPA, to be able to be delivered in the emergency department setting, and getting that data out of how it does that in the phase 2 will be really compelling, and it is a comparative advantage to another drug known as NA1, which isn't able to work with standard of care TPA. So it is a competitive advantage that we have with ARG-007, which makes it really compelling.